Welcome back to the deep dive. We are doing something a little distinct today, a bit of mental time travel. I want you to look at your phone, look at your calendar, and just mentally adjust the date. We are projecting ourselves forward to February 2026.
Which, depending on when you're listening to this, is either right around the corner or uncomfortably close. It's looming large on the horizon.
It really is. And the reason we're setting the scene in early 2026 is because the United States is staring down the barrel of a massive, once-in-a-lifetime milestone. We are just months away from July 4, 2026, the semi-quincentennial.
The big 250, 250 years, 2.5 centuries since the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I mean, that is a quarter of a millennium of the American experiment.
And usually, when you think about a birthday of that magnitude, the vibe is celebratory. It's supposed to be a party.
Absolutely.
You picture the tall ships sailing into Boston Harbor, the inevitable fireworks over the National Mall, the commemorative coins, all the speeches about how far we've come. It's usually a moment for a victory lap.
Right.
But the research we're unpacking today, specifically a really provocative article called Children of Abraham on Sacred Ground by a scholar named Iqbal Akhtar, it suggests that if we're preparing for a party, we are reading the room completely wrong.
Yeah, Akhtar frames this moment not as a celebration, but as a stress test. And I think that is such a useful, if a little sobering metaphor.
Stress test?
Yeah. I mean, think about it. When engineers stress test a bridge, they don't do it on a sunny day. They load it with immense weight. They subject it to pressure to see if the beams hold or if the steel snaps. Akhtar is basically arguing that this 250th anniversary is applying that kind of pressure to the structural integrity of the United States, and he's seeing fractures. He's seeing cracks appear.
And the source material, it paints a very specific and frankly kind of grim picture of the national mood in this 2026 scenario we're imagining. It talks about a decline in institutional trust that has gone from a slide to a complete freefall.
Right. Trust in everything. Government, media, even in each other.
It also describes an ambient polarization, which is a great, terrifying phrase.
It is a great phrase.
It suggests the tension isn't just, in Washington, D.C. It's in the grocery store. It's at the school board meeting. It's at the Thanksgiving dinner table. It's everywhere. And specifically, there's a rising tide of hate incidents.
That ambient tension is the key. Because it means the political has become deeply personal in a way that feels unsafe for a lot of people. And this is where the deep dive takes a turn that might surprise you. Because usually when pundits talk about the health of the nation, they look at the S&P 500 or they look at election polling data.
The usual metrics.
The usual metric. Akhtar says, stop looking there. If you want to know if America is going to survive its 250th birthday, if you really want to know if the experiment is actually working, you need to look at two very specific, relatively small populations, American Jews and American Muslims.
It does feel a little counterintuitive at first. I mean, these aren't the largest demographic groups in the country by a long shot.
Not at all.
Right.
But the argument here is that they are the bellwethers. They are the canaries in the coal mine for American democracy.
So if they're not okay, nobody's okay.
That's the idea. Because the central tension of the American project isn't really, can we make money or can we build a powerful army? The real fundamental tension is, can we live together with deep, profound, fundamental differences? That is the question the country was founded to answer. And right now, Jewish and Muslim communities are navigating the most intense, high-stakes version of that question. They're facing this landscape of rising hostility and really competing narratives about whether they even belong here in the first place.
So the thesis we're exploring today is pretty heavy. It's that the fate of American religious pluralism, the entire machinery that allows us to function as a diverse society, it all hinges on whether these two communities can figure out a way to move from what the author calls fair weather dialogue to a rugged, shared commitment to one another's safety.
Rugged commitment. I love that phrase. And I want us to keep coming back to that. It implies that the relationship has to be durable.
Yeah.
It has to be strong enough to survive bad weather. It's not just about having tea and hummus when things are calm.
Right. It's not a garden party.
Not at all. It's about what you do when the storm hits. What do you do when the hurricane is bearing down on you?
So we've got a serious roadmap for this deep dive. We're going to start by aggressively debunking the standard history book narrative, because it turns out our timeline of who arrived when regarding these communities is just factually, empirically wrong.
It's a major historical correction that we need to make.
Then we're going to get really granular and parse the difference between diversity and pluralism, a distinction that a Harvard scholar, Diana Eck, makes, which is just absolutely crucial for understanding our current moment.
And after that, well, we have to go through the fire. We're going to have a difficult, honest conversation about the collapse of the interfaith movement after October 7, 2023, and really try to understand why the old models failed so spectacularly.
And finally, and this is where it gets hopeful, we're going to look at the secret weapons that are hidden inside Jewish and Muslim theology, the source code, if you will, that might actually offer a solution to this crisis, a way forward.
It's a lot to unpack, but I think it's really the only way to truly understand what's at stake for the country in 2026 and beyond.
Okay, let's start with that historical correction, because I think if I went out on the street right now with a microphone and asked the average person to just, sketch out the timeline of religion in America, I'd get a very specific story.
Oh, for sure. You and I both know what they'd say.
It would start with the Pilgrims and the Puritans, Protestant Christians. Then you get the Founding Fathers, mostly deists or, liberal Protestants. And then much, much later, maybe around Ellis Island or the mid-20th century, the others arrive. The Jews, the Muslims, the Hindus, the Buddhists, they show up late and kind of have to ask for permission to join the club.
That is the default setting in our cultural memories, baked in. And it frames American history as a kind of dinner party where Protestant Christianity is the host, they own the house, and everyone else is a guest.
And guests have to be polite.
Guests have to be polite. Guests can't make too much noise. And guests ultimately can be asked to leave if they become inconvenient. But the source material we're looking at today argues that this is historically incomplete. In fact, it's just wrong. Jews and Muslims aren't guests who arrive late to the party. They are what Akhtar calls constitutive threads of the fabric.
Constitutive threads, meaning if you pull them out, the fabric itself unravels. It's not the same piece of cloth anymore.
Exactly. They were here before the United States was the United States. They aren't just in America. They helped make America. The structure is built with their contributions.
Okay, let's dig into that. Let's look at the Jewish roots first. The source points us to a really specific location, Newport, Rhode Island, and Congregation Shereth Israel.
This is such a pivotal piece of American history that it often gets glossed over in the textbooks. This congregation was officially organized in the 1650s.
The 1650s, I just want to pause on that date for a second.
Yeah.
We're talking more than a century, like 120 years before the Declaration of Independence.
A long time.
George Washington and Thomas Jefferson weren't even born yet.
Not even close. This is the era of Oliver Cromwell in England, for context. And the origin story of this community is just fascinating. These were Sephardic Jews of Spanish and Portuguese descent, who were actually fleeing persecution in Brazil.
It's from Brazil. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they'd gone to Brazil when the Dutch controlled a portion of it, because the Dutch were relatively tolerant. But when the Portuguese retook that territory, the Inquisition followed, and they had to run for their lives. So they got on boats and sailed north to the British colonies, seeking safety. They ended up in places like New Amsterdam, which became New York and Newport.
So by the time George Washington is inaugurated as the first president of the United States, there has been an organized, functioning, multi-generational Jewish community in Rhode Island for, 140 years?
For 4 or 5 generations at least, yes.
That just completely blows the immigrant guest narrative out of the water. They had been here longer than many of the so-called Founding Fathers' own families had been.
Absolutely. They weren't newcomers asking for a favor. They were established residents. And this deep presence forces the new government to reckon with them. It's not a theoretical question of what if Jews lived here. They do live here. And this leads to that famous letter, right? The Washington letter.
The letter to the Hebrew congregation at Newport, 1790.
It is, in my opinion, one of the top 5 most important documents in American history. It's right up there with the Declaration and the Constitution. Washington visited Newport on a tour, and the warden of the synagogue, a man named Moses Seixas, wrote him a letter welcoming him. Washington replied with this incredible text.
And the famous line is that the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance.
Chills every time I read it. To bigotry no sanction. But I want to understand the political mechanics there. Was he just being nice? Was this just a polite, thank you for the warm welcome note?
Right. Was this just 18th century PR?
Exactly. And the answer is no. This was a radical philosophical break from 3,000 years of European history. You have to understand, in Europe at that time, the absolute best a minority religion could hope for was toleration.
And toleration sounds nice to our modern ears.
It sounds nice, but it's actually a hierarchy. It means I am the dominant group, I hold all the power, and I, in my magnanimity, will tolerate you. I will allow you to exist. But because it's an allowance, a permission I grant, I can also revoke it if you get too loud or too annoying, or if it becomes politically convenient for me to persecute you again.
Right. It's like letting your younger brother play video games with you. You're letting him play, but it's your console, it's your house, and you can unplug his controller whenever you want.
That is a perfect analogy. Washington's letter completely flipped the table on that dynamic. He wasn't offering toleration. In fact, he explicitly says in the letter, it is now no more that toleration is spoken of. He was rejecting that old model. He was acknowledging a natural right.
A natural right, so it's inherent.
It's inherent. He was saying that their religious liberty didn't come from him or from the Congress or from the Protestant majority. It was endowed by their creator as part of their humanity. So he wasn't inviting them into the country. He was acknowledging that they were already home. They were co-owners of the house.
That is a massive distinction. It shifts the entire power dynamic. Okay, so if the Jewish history in early America is surprising to some, the Muslim history that the source outlines is. It's genuinely shocking to most people. I think most of us date the Muslim presence in America to, I don't know, immigration waves in the 1960s or 70s.
Which is a complete erasure of the actual demographic reality of the founding era. It's a historical blind spot the size of a continent. The source is very, very clear on this.
Okay.
The timeline of Islam in America begins with the slave trade.
Right.
And the numbers are just staggering. Mainstream academic scholarship now estimates that somewhere between 15 and 30% of the enslaved Africans brought to this continent were from Muslim regions of West Africa.
Wait, I want to make sure I heard that and that you at home heard that. Not 1 to 3%, 15 to 30%.
15 to 30%, yes. A massive demographic slice.
That means that in some areas of the colonial South, Islam was likely the second most dominant religion after various forms of Christianity.
Without a doubt. And we need to break down the stereotype of who these people were. The source really emphasizes that these weren't just laborers or people without culture, kind of blank slate. Many of them were Quranic scholars. They were Hafiz, which means they had memorized the entire Quran, all 6,000 plus verses, by heart.
Incredible.
They were literate in Arabic. They were highly educated intellectuals, theologians, jurists who were captured in wars or kidnapped, stripped of their freedom, and brought to a land where they had to try and maintain their faith under conditions of the most extreme repression imaginable.
The source mentions a few specific figures that I feel like should be household names in America. Omar ibn Said.
Omar ibn Said is a monumental figure in American religious history. He was a Fula Islamic scholar from a region that's now part of modern-day Senegal. He was enslaved in his late 30s, already a deeply educated man, and brought to North Carolina. But here's the incredible part. In his old age, he left behind an autobiography, written in his own hand, in beautiful, classical Arabic.
An autobiography, in Arabic, from an enslaved man in the 1830s.
Think about the significance of that artifact. We have a primary source document, written in the language of Islamic scholarship, by an enslaved man in the antebellum South, articulating his life, his theology, his sorrow. It's one of the most important documents we have.
That completely destroys the racist, paternalistic idea that African slaves were blank slates, just waiting to be civilized by their masters.
It shatters it. And he wasn't just writing his autobiography. The story goes that when he was first captured and sold, he ran away and was found in a jail cell. And he had been writing verses of the Quran on the walls of his cell in charcoal. His existence proves that Islam is not foreign to American soil. It is in the soil. It was here, in the minds and hearts of the people who literally built the economy of the early United States with their forced labor.
And there was another one mentioned, even earlier, Estevanico.
Right, Mustafa Zamori, who is known to the Spanish as Estevanico. He was a Moroccan Muslim. He was enslaved by Spanish conquistadors in the early 1500s. But he became one of the first Africans, one of the first non-indigenous people, period, to explore the North American continent.
In the 1500s?
In the 1520s and 1530s. He was traversing the American Southwest, what is now New Mexico and Arizona, decades before the English settlement at Jamestown was even a thought.
So a Muslim man was exploring the American frontier before the Pilgrims even landed at Plymouth Rock.
Correct. He is a constitutive thread, and this presence continues right into the Revolutionary War. If you go through the muster rolls, the official military lists of the Continental Army, you find names like Bampet Mohammed and Yusuf Ben Ali.
So men with Muslim names fighting for American independence.
Fighting and dying for the cause of American independence. It really reframes the whole picture. It isn't just European Christians fighting the British. It is this much more complex, much more diverse coalition of people from the very, very beginning.
And this brings us to Thomas Jefferson, a complicated figure to say the least, but one who was thinking about these issues. We know he owned a Quran.
He did. He bought a copy as a young law student in Williamsburg. And it wasn't a souvenir or a curiosity. Jefferson was a student of the Enlightenment. He was interested in comparative law, comparative religion. He bought it to understand Islamic law, or Sharia, because he wanted to understand how other societies structured themselves.
And that study, it influenced his politics.
Deeply. When the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom was being debated, which is really the precursor to the First Amendment's religion clauses, Jefferson argued explicitly that its protection should extend to everyone. He listed them out in his autobiography when he was describing the fight to get it passed. He said the law was meant to comprehend within the mantle of its protection the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and Mohammedan, the Hindu and infidel of every denomination.
Mohammedan being the 18th century term for Muslim. So he's naming them. He's saying Muslims belong under this protection.
He's saying everyone belongs. But here's the catch, and this is a really important and sobering nuance the source brings up. That specific, incredibly inclusive listing of religions, it was removed from the final text of the statute.
So they cut it. They took out the specific protections.
They kept the broad principle of religious freedom, but they cut the specific list because it was too controversial for the Virginia legislature at the time. There were people, like Patrick Henry, who wanted to maintain a kind of soft establishment of Christianity. And that is the key takeaway here for our deep dive. The source argues this proves that American pluralism was always aspirational.
Aspirational, not actual.
Exactly. The intent was there at the founding. Jefferson wanted it, Madison wanted it, but the fact that that language was amended shows it was never settled. It was never a done deal. We have been fighting about who belongs, about the scope of that protection since day one.
So what here? The big conclusion for this section is that the 250th anniversary in 2026 isn't about inviting Jews and Muslims to the American table for the first time. It's about finally fully recognizing that they helped build the table.
You cannot tell the story of America accurately without them. They're not an asterisk, they're a chapter.
Okay, so that's the history. We were always here. But just being here, just having different groups living on the same plot of land, that doesn't automatically mean everything is working. Which brings us to section 2 of our outline, the architecture of pluralism versus diversity.
This is such a crucial intellectual distinction, and the source here relies heavily on the work of Diana Eck, a scholar from Harvard who founded the Pluralism Project. She makes a very simple but profound point. Diversity is a fact. Pluralism is an achievement.
That sounds like a great bumper sticker, but let's break it down. What is the actual practical difference between those two words?
Okay, so diversity is just demographics. It's the census data. It means you have different kinds of people living in close proximity to each other. Baghdad in the 9th century, at the height of the Abbasid Caliphate, was incredibly diverse. The Ottoman Empire was diverse. The antebellum South, tragically, was diverse. But none of those were pluralist in the modern democratic sense.
Because there was a clear hierarchy. There was a dominant group and then everyone else.
Exactly. Diversity can exist with rigid segregation. Diversity can exist with oppression. Diversity can exist with violence. Pluralism is what happens when you take that fact of diversity and you build something with it. You build a society where people from different backgrounds actually engage with one another constructively, where they are committed to each other's dignity and participate in a shared society as equals.
So diversity is the raw material and pluralism is the finished product.
That's a great way to put it. And as another scholar in this field, Ibu Patel, often says, pluralism is not a birthright. It doesn't just happen because you have different neighbors. It is a responsibility. You have to build it and you have to maintain it. It's like a garden. If you don't tend to it, the weeds of prejudice and hatred will take over.
So if pluralism is a construction project, how is America's building looking after 250 years?
It's a mixed bag. Structurally, it's a bit of a mess, honestly. On the good side, the blueprint is brilliant. You have the First Amendment, free exercise, and the non-establishment clause. We have to stop and acknowledge how radical that is. No other nation in human history has attempted to have this much diversity with this much religious freedom for this long. It is structurally a miracle that it has worked as well as it has.
But then there's the bad, the long history of failures in the architecture.
Right. The source points to what it calls the contested architecture. We have a blueprint for a beautiful building, but we have a history of failing at pluralism repeatedly, often violently. You look at the nativist riots of the 1840s in Philadelphia, mobs of Protestant citizens burning down Catholic churches and convents because they believed Catholics couldn't be real Americans, that they were loyal to a foreign power, the Pope.
And that same logic gets used again and again.
Again and again. We have the history of institutional anti-Semitism. In the 1920s and 30s, elite universities like Harvard and Yale actually had official quotas on how many Jews could attend. There were housing covenants in neighborhoods all across America saying you couldn't sell a house to a Jewish family. This was structural. This was policy.
And then, most recently in our memory, post 9/11.
Right. After September 11, 2001, we saw that architecture of exclusion turn against Muslims. You had surveillance programs with the NYPD that specifically targeted Muslim neighborhoods, mosques, student groups. You had cultural exclusion, the constant media portrayal of every Muslim as a potential suspect, the feeling that you had to constantly prove your loyalty.
And the source argues we are in another one of those dark moments right now. It cites some really terrifying numbers from the period following October 7, 2023.
The numbers are, they're staggering. And they show the system is flashing red. The ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, they do an annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. Their 2024 audit recorded 9,354 separate anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S.
9,000?
9,354. That is an all-time high since they began tracking in the 1970s. And notably, that includes an 84% increase on college campuses.
84%. I mean, that means if you were a Jewish student, your environment, your sense of safety fundamentally changed almost overnight.
It did. The entire atmosphere shifted. And at the same time, CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, reported a parallel and equally terrifying escalation in anti-Muslim incidents. Reports of discrimination, bullying of children in schools, hate crimes like the stabbing of a 6-year-old Palestinian-American boy in Illinois.
It's just horrifying.
It is. And the expert insight from the source material here is absolutely vital for everyone to understand. These are not two separate problems.
That's hard because they feel like separate problems when you watch the news. It feels like side A versus side B. It's framed as a conflict.
That is the trap. And it's a dangerous one. The source argues that these are two faces of the same single failure. When the immune system of pluralism breaks down, when we stop seeing our neighbors as individuals holding natural rights and start seeing them as symbols of a political conflict or as threats, Jews and Muslims are both the first to get sick.
The canaries in the coal mine.
They are the first targets. They're often the minority groups that carry the most distinct markers of difference, whether it's a yarmulke or hijab. So a rise in hate against one is almost always a predictor of a rise in hate against the other. They are structurally linked.
Which brings us to what is probably the most difficult part of this conversation. Section 3, the crucible. October 7th and the failure of dialogue.
This is where the rubber meets the road. This is the stress test in action.
The source describes the aftermath of the October 7th attacks and the devastating war in Gaza that followed as a shattering. And specifically, it shattered the assumptions of the American interfaith movement.
Yes. For about 20 years prior, really since 9/11, there had been a growing and, in many ways, very positive interfaith movement in the U.S. A lot of good people doing what they thought was good work.
But the source critiques it as having been a fair-weather friendship. That is a harsh assessment. What did that fair-weather friendship look like in practice?
It was polite. It was civil. It was often centered on the least controversial things. Food and festivals. I'll come to your iftar dinner during Ramadan. You come to my Seder dinner during Passover. I'll eat your samosas, you eat my latkes, and we'll talk about how we all want peace and we all love our children.
Which is nice. I mean, it's not bad.
It's not bad. It's better than nothing. But the source argues it was brittle. It relied on actively avoiding the hard stuff. It built a relationship by carefully avoiding the one thing that everyone knew was the source of potential conflict, the political situation in the Middle East. It was the elephant in the room that everyone pretended not to see.
So when the war started, when that elephant went on a rampage, that avoidance wasn't possible anymore.
Exactly. When October 7th happened, when real, visceral grief and political anger and historical trauma just exploded into the open, those polite relationships couldn't hold the weight. They hadn't built the muscle for disagreement. The source mentions that so many of these interfaith partners, people who'd been meeting for years, just stopped talking to each other. There was silence. Because they didn't have the tools, they didn't have the language to handle the raw emotion.
There's a line in the article that just floored me. It says, if a relationship can't survive honest disagreement, it was never a relationship. It was just proximity.
That is the core truth of this entire deep dive. Proximity isn't enough. Standing next to someone in line at Starbucks doesn't mean you have a relationship that can survive a war or even a heated political argument. It just means you both want coffee.
So the source argues we need a pivot, a totally new model of engagement. We have to move away from prioritizing politeness and toward holding space for disagreement.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because they suggest we can find the models for this within the traditions themselves.
They use some specific terminology, right, from Islam and Judaism.
Yes. From the Islamic tradition, they use the term majlis. A majlis literally means a sitting, a gathering. But culturally, it implies a serious discussion, a place where weighty matters are hashed out by the community. It's not a casual chat. It's a space for deep, sometimes difficult conversation.
And from the Jewish tradition, the concept is machlokes l'shem shamayim. Did I say that right?
It did. Machlokes l'shem shamayim. It translates literally to argument for the sake of heaven.
That sounds like a contradiction. How is arguing for heaven? That sounds like the opposite.
It's a foundational concept from the Mishnah and the Talmud, the core texts of rabbinic Judaism. The rabbis disagree on almost everything, vehemently. They argue, they shout, they dissect every word of the law. But they don't stop being part of the same community. The argument itself is considered a form of worship, a form of collectively grappling to find God's will.
So the goal isn't to win.
The goal isn't to destroy your opponent or prove you're smarter. The goal is to grapple together in good faith to find the truth, or at least a better path forward for the community. If you and I argue just to prove who's right, that's an argument for the sake of ego. If we argue because we both care deeply about an issue and want to find the best solution, that's an argument for the sake of heaven.
And the author gives a real-world example of this pivot in action. Iqbal Akhtar himself, the author of the piece, and a local rabbi named Jamie Akhlepi, they founded an organization called Miami Interfaith immediately after the attacks.
Right in the heat of it. In October 2023, when everyone else was retreating to their corners, putting up walls, they made the conscious choice to step toward each other. And they didn't do it to issue a joint statement saying, we agree on everything.
Right. They weren't trying to solve the Middle East from Miami.
Not at all. They did it to sit together in the mess, to create a space where Jews could mourn their dead and Muslims could mourn theirs, to hold the grief of the other side without having to validate the politics of the other side. That's a very difficult, very adult thing to do.
And this leads to a really hard truth for the listener, and I want everyone to really hear this because it completely changes the goalposts of what we're trying to achieve here. The source says the goal is not to agree on Middle East politics.
We may never agree on that,
Yeah.
and that have to be okay. The narratives are so divergent, the pain is so deep, the history is so contested. If the prerequisite for being good neighbors in America is that we first have to agree on the borders and history of the Middle East, we are finished. The American experiment will fail. We will never make it.
So if that's not the goal, what is?
The goal is solidarity in the American public square. It is committing to each other's dignity and safety here, regardless of what happens there. It is the ability to say, I might completely disagree with your view on the war. I might find your political stance abhorrent, but I will fight to the death for your right to be safe in this country, to pray in your synagogue or mosque without fear, to send your kids to school without them being bullied.
That is a much higher bar than just being nice over some hummus.
It is. It is a rugged pluralism. It requires a very thick skin and a surprisingly soft heart at the same time.
So where do we find the strength to do that? Because honestly, that sounds exhausting. Usually people blame religion for this conflict. They say, if we just got rid of the God stuff, we'd all get along just fine. But Section 4 of our outline argues the exact opposite. It says the solutions are actually hidden deep in the theology of both faiths.
This is the secret weapon part of the deep dive, and it's the most counterintuitive part. We tend to think of religion as the source of the division, my God versus your God. But Akhtar argues that if you actually read the foundational texts, the Quran and the Jewish scriptures, they provide the roadmap, the actual software, for building this interconnected future.
Let's start with the Muslim perspective. There's a verse from the Quran that the source highlights. Surah 49, verse 13.
It's a very famous verse. O mankind, indeed, we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another.
Know one another. That sounds simple enough.
But the Arabic verb that's used here is lita'arafu. And as with so many things in Arabic, the root implies so much more than the simple English translation. It isn't just shaking hands or recognizing a face. It implies a deep, mutual recognition, a knowing that transforms you. The theology here is profound. The Quran is saying that God created diversity on purpose.
It wasn't a mistake. God could have made everyone the same.
Right. And another verse, Surah 5, verse 48, explicitly says that. Had God willed, he could have made you one single community. But he didn't. He made us different to test you in what he has given you.
So diversity is a test, a divine pop quiz.
It is a test. It's a divine setup. And what is the correct answer to the test? The verse continues. So compete with one another in good works.
I love that framing. A race to righteousness. Not a race to conquer or convert, but a race to see who can do the most good in the world.
Exactly. It completely reframes the other. My religious neighbor is not my enemy. They are my competitor in goodness. If my Jewish neighbor is building a homeless shelter, my response as a Muslim shouldn't be to stop him. It should be to try and build a better, bigger homeless shelter right next to his. That's the competition God wants.
That's a powerful idea. And what about the Jewish perspective? What are the theological tools there?
Well, it starts with the most fundamental concept in the entire Torah, B'Tselem Elohim. Every single human being is created in the image of God, not just Jews, everyone. If you truly deeply believe that, you cannot dehumanize your neighbor, no matter how much you disagree with them. To harm a human being is to deface the very image of God in the world.
And then there's that famous line from the Mishnah about saving a life.
Right, from Tractate Sanhedrin, whoever destroys a single life, it is as if he's destroyed an entire world. And whoever saves a single life, it is as if he has saved an entire world. It emphasizes the infinite cosmic value of the individual. But I think the most powerful theological tool for this specific challenge comes from the late, great Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He wrote a seminal book called The Dignity of Difference.
Great title. Very direct.
And his argument was revolutionary. He said that in the Abrahamic tradition, God makes a particular covenant with a specific people, the Jews. But that particular covenant does not negate God's universal care for all other peoples. God is the God of all humanity, but he relates to us in our particularity. So I can be fully and unapologetically Jewish, and you can be fully and unapologetically Muslim, and we can both be loved by God and part of God's plan. My truth doesn't require your falsity.
That is the dignity of difference. It completely solves the zero-sum game of my religion is right, so yours must be wrong.
Yes, and this all leads to the practical concept of interconnected futures. This isn't just abstract theology. It becomes a political and social strategy.
And the source quotes Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the ADL, to illustrate this. This was back in 2016.
Right. This was during the presidential campaign. And there was a lot of political rhetoric at the time about creating a Muslim registry, forcing Muslim citizens to register with the government. And Greenblatt, the head of the largest and oldest organization fighting anti-Semitism in America, stood up and said, and I'm quoting, "If one day American Muslims are forced to register, that is the day that this proud Jew will register as a Muslim."
Wow. That's a powerful statement of solidarity.
It's the ultimate statement.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the political landscape has become much more complicated and fraught since 2016, and there are very real tensions between these groups and organizations now. But the principle of that statement holds. It is the realization that a threat to one is a threat to the other. If you allow the government to target one religious minority, you have destroyed the constitutional protection for all of them.
It's that idea, again, our fates are structurally linked. You can't actually be safe if your neighbor isn't safe.
Precisely. Your safety is dependent on mine and mine on yours, whether we like it or not.
Okay, so we have the corrected history, we have the diagnosis of the crisis, and we have the theological resources. Now we need the action plan. We're hitting July 2026. What do we actually do? The source gives us a very practical to-do list for America at 250.
And it is a practical list. It's not just wishful thinking. It's about moving from nostalgia to actual work.
Commitment number 1, from dialogue to shared practice.
This is a big one. Stop just talking. Do things together. The source specifically suggests joint study of sacred texts.
Like actually sitting in a room and reading the Torah and the Quran side by side.
Yes, and not in a debating society kind of way where you're trying to prove your book is better. Okhdar calls this creating intellectual intimacy. When you sit down and you seriously study someone else's holy text with them, not to convert or be converted, but to understand how they see the world, what their deepest values are. It builds a bond that is much stronger than just eating falafel together.
Yeah.
You see their values. You see their struggles. You see that they are wrestling with God and with meaning just like you are.
That sounds incredibly challenging, but also incredibly powerful. Okay, commitment number 2, invest in the next generation.
This is absolutely critical. The college campuses are where the heat is right now. They are the epicenters of the conflict. But the source points out that they are also where the hope is. The Interfaith America Leadership Summit, in 2025, it says, had its largest attendance ever.
So despite all the news stories we see about campus chaos and division, students are actually showing up for this work.
They are. Young people are hungry for a better way. The Force says students are proving that interfaith friendship is both commonplace and extraordinary. But they need support. They need funding. They need mentorship. You can't just expect a bunch of 19-year-olds to figure this out on their own while the entire world is shouting at them through their phones.
Yeah.
We have to invest in the programs that teach them how to have these difficult arguments for the sake of heaven.
Commitment number 3, develop a shared narrative.
This goes right back to the history section we started with. We need to stop telling the Jewish story of America and the Muslim story of America as if they're two separate books on the shelf.
Because they're not, they're chapters in the same book.
It's a braided narrative. The story is about the colonial Jewish congregations and the enslaved West African Muslims. It's about the civil rights coalitions where rabbis and imams marched together with Dr. King. It's about the post-9/11 solidarity where Jewish communities protected mosques from vandalism. We need to tell that story as one single stream. Because when you tell the story together, you create a sense of shared ownership of the country. If I know that your ancestors helped build this place alongside mine, I can't look at you as an outsider or a foreigner.
And finally, commitment number 4, build storm-proof structures.
This is the ultimate lesson from October 7th. Don't wait for the crisis to start building the relationship. That's like trying to build a lifeboat in the middle of a tsunami. You have to build the institutions now that expect the crisis. You need to design your community organizations, your interfaith councils, your campus groups, so that they can handle anger and disagreement and grief without collapsing.
It's like building a house in a hurricane zone. You don't build it for the 300 sunny days a year. You build it for the Category 5 storm that you know is coming eventually.
Exactly, because the storms will come. That is the nature of a diverse democracy. If you build a structure that only works when everyone is happy and in agreement, it's fundamentally useless.
This brings us to the end, and the source leaves us with a really powerful full-circle image. It brings us right back to George Washington's letter to the congregation in Newport.
He closes that letter by quoting the prophet Micah from the Hebrew Bible. He offers a vision of the America he hopes to build. He writes that in this new nation, everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid.
None to make him afraid. I mean, that's the dream of America, isn't it? Freedom from fear.
It is. It's the ultimate promise. And the source points out that this vision of safety and peace of salam, which means wholeness in Arabic, is just as central to the Quran. It is the shared dream of the children of Abraham.
So, to summarize the entire argument of this deep dive, Jews and Muslims are not guests in America. They are co-inheritors of the Abrahamic tradition and co-stakeholders in the American project. Their futures here are structurally linked. If one goes down, the other goes down. And if they can figure out how to build a rugged commitment to one another, the entire American experiment has a chance to survive and even thrive.
That is the equation. That is the stress test of 2026.
So as we approach July 4, 2026, here's the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to take with you. The source makes it clear that we are 250 years into this experiment, and that beautiful vision of the vine and fig tree is still just a promise. It's not a reality for a lot of people in this country.
For far too many people, it is definitely not a reality yet. They are still afraid.
So the question for you is, are you treating pluralism as a spectator sport? Are you just watching the news, scrolling through social media and shaking your head at the division? Or are you actively building the structure that keeps your neighbor safe? Because if you're waiting for someone else to build that vine and fig tree for you, it's not going to get built.
It is on us. It has always been on us.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We will see you next time.
Take care, everyone.